relationship between these platforms and workers? Like, does that, the dynamic is, it sounds more like worker friendly than it could be in a couple of years.
Well, it's something that we think about a lot in terms of building a sustainable company. And what a lot of people like to overlook is that the on-demand economy was born in the worst employment market probably in recent memory. And so as the economy recovers, it becomes less attractive if you have like a PhD to be a TaskRabbit. And so when we think about the jobs that we're creating, we really want to be able to create meaningful careers and not just like something for people to do in their spare time. And it also, from like to your original question around what it means in terms of recruiting a workforce, it opens up a lot of avenues to us that are both really like exciting and interesting, but also aren't really available to on-demand companies that use contractors. So because we're creating what are classically considered good jobs, we're able to work with government agencies, nonprofits, community associations, different ethnic associations that want to see people placed in good jobs. And so one of the things we do, instead of just posting ads on Craigslist, we're actually like actively developing relationships with these amazing organizations that, it's already in their DNA to try and place good people into good jobs. So they're actually doing some of the vetting for us.
You're doing in-house training, right? Like,
yeah.
People can kind of move up the...
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're conscious of is that nobody wants to be in a dead-end job, and it doesn't matter if you are an engineer or someone coming into a cleaning role. And so we've gone out of our way to really map career paths within the organization that allow people to grow in their careers. So from entering as an operator doing the cleaning, they can move up to being a mentor where they're part of our training program. They can become a lead operator where they're running a bigger facility. They can become a supervisor where they're out doing quality assurance checks. And from there, there's tons of other roles in the company. So we have a woman who started as one of our first operators, became a supervisor, and now she works at headquarters writing curriculum for training supervisors. We're talking about programs to train operators that are interested in the tech side of the business on QA, because it's not that hard to train people to do QA engineering. And so we're constantly like pushing ourselves to find ways to create a truly integrated company. And I think, I think it's important to think of the workforce as customers, but it's also important for us in our context to think of them as part of the company. And so, we have a policy where they're always welcome in the office. We have a space that is purposed just to have extra computers so they can come in and like they'll print stuff for their kids' school if they need to or whatever. Things that you or I would do with our office. Like they feel like they're part of a company rather than like there's us people who work in the office and then there's you people who do the work in the field. We really like have to go out of our way to create a really integrated company. Otherwise, it just doesn't feel especially sustainable given the type of work that we do.
But those are possibilities that seem enabled by the fact that your workers are fully in-house. And
totally.
I've run into other companies that have, like there's one very large on-demand company that 1099s its workers, and it was very interesting because one of their PMs had left and was starting a training company to train workers to then work on their platform. And I was like, well, why don't you just train them in-house? And they were like, that opens up all these sorts of legal liabilities around the 1099 model. And so if you choose the 1099 model, you end up having the system that incentivizes you to sort of horizontally slice out all these elements that would normally be vertically contained in an employer-employee relationship.
That's why you employ people.
Yeah.
And that's also the argument for this new class of workers.
Which for your model, when you have peak hours at, morning, afternoon, it makes sense for you. So there's a couple, so let's talk about, there's one good kind of theory on the good side, one theory that I've heard is that this type of labor maybe enables over the long term like a naturally lower unemployment rate because you're kind of sucking up people who would traditionally be counted as unemployed into, working flexible jobs. Do you think that might be true or?
Well, I think people will always go through transition. Like, yes, you want to build long-term career opportunities for people, but there's also need for transition times.
Yeah.
Even in my last company, and same with this one, I hear all the time, like, man, I just really needed to make some extra money for, a month or two.
Yeah.
And without this opportunity, like, man, I would have lost my house, or I wouldn't have been able to feed my kids. And should we get rid of that because this should be like a full-time employment? I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think you need the room for both of these things. And a lot of the people who do these types of services, not just for my company, but for others, like really like the flexibility. I love that no one is telling me to, you have to be at work at 8 a.m. and you have to do this.
And you don't have to. I mean, that's a decision you make as an employer. Like, we don't force anyone to go to any shift. Like, you can still have the dynamic of choosing when you want to work. It pushes the complexity onto us as the employer to figure it out. And so, like, we need enough throughput, and we have to, like, model, you know, all these different things. But you can do it. It's just a decision you make as an employer. You don't have to tell someone when to show up. You can let them choose their own hours.
Speaking of that kind of third, like what, you know, given that you're servicing all these, working with all these contractor and on-demand companies, like what do you think, what would you like to see that labor structure look like in, you know, 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think for us it's to see if there is this new class, and I think things are moving along that direction, and whatever that turns out to be will change the way a lot of companies are structured or will be restructured. So it's hard for us to say today, and we don't know what exactly it'll look like.
How, so I think with different types of service work, you know, there's different ways that systems can be abused. So like, if you look at, you know, corporations today that hire lots of low-wage service workers, I mean, there's abuse in the form of automated scheduling. But if you look at sort of the new models, one thing that concerns me is the level of transparency that, say, you know, a platform like Uber is offering its drivers around what they're really making after wear and tear and insurance risks. What kind of obligation should they have? Should like a platform company like you have, in, you know, making sure that workers really understand, you know, what they're really making?
That's a great question. It really is. I mean, you know, we're just starting. We're very early in the process.
Yeah.
So I think over time too, people start to understand, like, okay, well, yeah, in the case of driving, there's gas, there's insurance, there's all these things, and they're putting more miles on the car. There's a new company just out that's actually like tracking these for people, and whether it's an obligation sort of for us to help kind of communicate what that is, like, I don't know yet. I think it makes a lot of sense.
What do you tell people now when they're getting the kind of their receipt or their invoice from you? Do you just like the raw earnings, or?
Yeah, they get to see on like a per ride basis. They also know ahead of time because we know like the pickup and drop off, so we know how long the trip is actually going to take. So our drivers get to say, okay, well, here's a 17-minute trip. It fits perfectly in my schedule, and I'm going to make a minimum of $15. So when you look at it on a dollar basis, I mean, even a 5-minute ride for us is $15.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making this choice ahead of time that it's worth their time, worth their money, fits in their schedule. And so it translates on an hourly basis. I mean, we were talking about the minimum wage backstage, and it translates on an hourly basis, like multiples higher than that, especially for some people, depending on how they're using the service.
Mm-hmm.
Or making it more transparent to do things like, if your drivers are your customers, making it more clear, you know, what it means to be a contractor for you. Like, certain things you can't say, like how should you file your taxes, but you can provide the tools like how many miles have you driven, or you know, what part of your income has been used for doing a design task, or if you buy a new computer, like what are things that you can deduct and maximize your taxes at the end of your savings at the end of the year.
I think like the overarching theme, and it's the same thing with the scheduling though, is it externalizes the complexity that's required to be in business to the individual. And I think, like, to your point, it would be nice if people were educated on like what it actually meant in terms of like, you know, what they're going to have to pay in taxes, and it's like why you guys are in business, like. But there's no requirement for the employer to do so. And so it takes all of the complexity that historically is owned by the company, like, you know, in your case, fleet management, for example, and pushes it to the individual. I don't have like an opinion on whether that's right or wrong, but I think it's, you know, it's essentially just stripping out the complexity of being an employer and pushing all of that onto the individual to figure it out.
Do you think, I mean, if companies don't do it in a responsible way, I mean, you're running the risk that eventually it's legislated and done through the state, right? I mean, and it may be done in a way that's done through, say, the court system, which is like much more unpredictable and done on a very narrow case-by-case basis rather than through like a wide, thoughtful policy lens.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. Well, I don't know. I mean, where we've arrived at today with like W-2 and 1099 has been like, you know, a century of evolution of policy, and like it'll be interesting to see kind of what the next turn of it is. I'm sure there'll be something, but you know, it takes time for policy to evolve and get to a place where everyone says like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. Which is why when you strip away, you know, like all of the things that have been added to being an employee over the last, you know, literally century, like it's pretty meaningful and it has real meaningful impact that's then externalized. And so, you know, you have companies not paying the taxes with health insurance and disability, you know, somebody's paying for that. And I think like that's kind of like the big question is what does it all look like at scale? And you know, somebody's footing the bill.
Okay, cool. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you guys. Thank you.